Great. I'm really excited to be here. I recognize I'm your last speaker before the end of the day, so hopefully we'll leave this on a high note today. This is my first time presenting at a group like this. I'm actually really happy I got to see the workshop piece before and understand a little bit about what you guys are talking about and some of the things that you're working through, which resonate for me, and a lot of them you'll see in what I have to say today too. I'm a little nervous. We'll go with that. I'll just put it on the table. I think that sort of anxiousness means it's a really great development opportunity. That's usually my thing, is if your gut is telling you you're not super comfortable, it means you're growing and developing. So maybe that's another thing. And I do just want to say thanks to you guys for having me. Thanks to Martha for kind of talking me into it, more talking me into making me realize I could do it, and helping me along the way to prepare for this. So hopefully today you're able to take away some great insights that can help you, not just in your professional life, but also in your personal life. So those two things blur a lot. And I think strategies in one can always carry over. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in the 80s, so that probably dates me, but that's okay. I started out my life in small town Ontario. I had young parents, and I was in a community that was pretty community focused. And so I had a fair bit of extended family around me as a child. I also had a lot of examples around me that were sort of traditional gender roles. So pretty much every woman in my life, my mom, my aunts, my grandma, was in nursing. The men were farmers. So that was sort of the dynamic that I grew up in. And with that, there also came maybe another little barrier there, that we were working class. We were not well off or financially, even middle class, I would say. And so even in that, I would say that probably my early childhood was really grounded on not feeling like there was much beyond my immediate what I could see. And so not a lot of examples of people exploring what else there could be outside of that. So that changed fairly dramatically when I was 7. My parents separated, and my mom dramatically moved my brother and I from Ontario all the way across Canada to Vancouver Island. And in hindsight, this was such a positive disruptor event for my life. I would say it expanded my view of the world. It drove me to step outside of my norms and the people that I had typically seen around me. And it really opened my mind to change in a way that has continued to carry through my entire career. We moved back to Ontario when I was 11, so that was a harder transition. And I would say when I came back, the kids in my new returned neighborhood had established friendships. And it was a bit of a challenging social period for me through elementary. And what that meant is that I really dove into school. I was a super academic kid and enjoyed school, excelled at it. Although I didn't have university examples, I started to hear from my parents, really from people in the school system, the idea of going to university and thinking that that was a good thing to do. And so that became my new norm. Strove to university and chose engineering with almost no idea of what that was. Knew that I wanted to do, although I liked art, had gotten the message that math and science was a more employable direction, and chose it because it felt like I was keeping my doors open. And it probably was, you know. So one thing I'll say about myself too is, if you know Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENTJ. And in here, it's really the N and the T that I'm going to talk about. So I'm a thinker more than a feeler, but then I go and I make big life decisions on intuition without really, I'll just jump and make that decision, which is kind of what happened with me in the engineering. So gone through engineering. My engineering career began with an internship at Syncrude. At that point, being in Ontario University, many of my peers were looking at biotech, pharmaceuticals, and that sort of thing. And I chose an internship in oil and gas because it was something different. And it brought me to Edmonton. Now I'm in a Calgary room, so you can judge what you want from that. But Edmonton sounded really exciting from London, Ontario. The role also included a lot of travel to Fort McMurray, and that turned out to be really awesome too. I got used to what Fort McMurray was, spent some time in a operating plant at that point. And so when I graduated a couple years later, I did make the choice to move to Fort McMurray, first with a water treatment company, and then I joined Suncor in 2005. And I've been with them ever since. So I'm at 18 years, 10 years in Fort McMurray, and now I've been in Calgary for 10 years. And I would say I have been extremely fortunate to have had a really rewarding, diverse career so far in my time with Suncor. I've had roles in engineering, environment and regulatory, project development and project management, risk management. I've worked in our Suncor upstream division as well as now I'm in our downstream division. And I've had the opportunity to move through progressive levels of leadership. So I feel really fortunate to have had the experience that I've had with Suncor. Um, Looking back, I'd say every role has contributed to where I am today. One of my pieces of advice is stick with a role for probably 3 years or more. A lot of times there's a feeling like you need to move more quickly. And what I found is that really in that 3 year window, you spend some time getting to know your team, the people you work with, the people you work for. You get to understand the work. And the first year, you're just understanding the work. And a lot of times, then you learn how to deliver the work. And I would say towards the end of the 3 years, that's when you're actually like contributing and improving. And anything beyond that is great too. But I would say as a minimum, it's really good to have that frame of reference as a point to start from. I think the idea is that in 3 years you can start to leave a legacy. Not much of a legacy. The legacy comes longer, but at least you have made an impression and a difference in the work that you're doing. Um, in each of the roles I've had, there's so much to learn. And one of the things that I found really helpful is not stopping at the boundaries of your role. What I find is you can get to the boundary of your role, and then that creates an opportunity to start asking questions beyond and understanding where your role starts to interface with others. And it starts to inform what other opportunities are out there. So that's one other piece of tip that I would have in that space. So Martha had mentioned a role I didn't feel super qualified to take and to step into. And that was the role of process engineering director for the Fort Hills fixed plant operation. And I held that role for about 3 years, to my point earlier. Prior to taking that role, I really had an image in my mind that was formed through the early years of my career on what an engineering director, what a good engineering director looked like, sounded like, had done. They were typically a very technical person. They'd had many years of direct engineering experience. They were very detail oriented, and I would say they were probably a guy. Like that, in all of the cases that I had seen before, that was really what I had seen in an engineering director in my company. My own professional experience differed a lot from this model. I'd spent a lot of time in environmental affairs and regulatory. I'd spent some time in projects, and these weren't the similar experiences that I had seen. And so I didn't think that I was even a contender. I had been working in Fort Hills when the fixed plant director role was becoming available. The other aspect I'd say is that that's a fly-in, fly-out site. So the operations are a plane ride away from Calgary. I have a young family. I have 3 kids, and at that point, my youngest was 4, and I thought, this is a non-starter, right? So I thought it was a hurdle that I could not overcome. And at that point, the engineering director role had a pretty significant Monday to Thursday commitment on site, and so it seemed just not even something that I would entertain. I will say that, like I said, the previous role that I had been working in was in the Fort Hills operation, supporting our capital portfolio. And through that, I'd had a few opportunities outside of my normal work where I got to work with leaders who ended up being very good allies for me. And I had gone and taken on some assignments. We had a big review of our Fort Hills investment, and that was a very large piece of work that I had led, where I ended up working with a lot of leaders. And the exposure ended up creating, like I said, some really good allies in that spot. And so as this role became available, they did a couple things. They advocated to others that I would be a good fit for the role and that I could make it work. They advocated to me that I had the skills that were required, and they helped me to navigate things like that work-life balance, that personal life challenge that I was struggling with thinking about kids that I didn't want to go away for lengths of time. And in the end, we were able to come up with a solution that works. So I still needed to travel, but I could do it on a less frequent schedule. I would go up a couple days every 2 weeks. and I could do it at a frequency and timing that worked with my husband's schedule, for example. And so we were able to navigate that barrier. Wasn't perfect for me, there were still nights that I needed to be away from my family, but it was a compromise that allowed it to work. So that's the logistics side. Starting in that role, I felt completely unprepared. This was a super team. They had designed, built, and commissioned a multi-billion-dollar asset. They had taken it through a fixed plant startup that was nearly flawless, and the performance of these assets was proven immediately. So I had this amazing team of highly skilled, technically capable engineers, and I felt like my technical experience paled in comparison. Um, but I realized a few things. Number one, I realized I wasn't really there to be the smartest engineer, and I was part of a team. And so coming in, a big part of my role was listening to other people, understanding the problems and the challenges they had, shifting from a focus that had been a lot about technical perfection and delivering like one common goal to, well, okay, now we need to run this thing for 50 years. What are the things that we need to prioritize and work through? Less from a technical perspective, almost shifting to more of a business perspective. So it was that up and out thinking that I was able to bring. Another thing that was evident as I came into the role is the team dynamics in this team were quite challenged. We had a lot of senior engineers, and they were coming off an exciting startup. They were thinking about their next role, which may not have been running a plant for 50 years. And we had no EITs or early talent pipeline. And so there was a big part of my role at that point that allowed me to think about the structure of a team and how we set up resetting the talent pipeline, assigning work diversely across the team, and then working on things like mentorship, which provides value for both ends of the spectrum, from junior people right up to the senior people. Probably most importantly is the role made me recognize and stop underestimating my own technical capabilities. All that stuff at the front end, I realized that I could understand it. I was as smart in many ways as the people in the room. And it wasn't about that. It was about us coming together and learning together. I dug in deeper than the surface on problems and opportunities. I tried to ask questions when things didn't seem to make sense or feel right. And I built a lot of credibility and trust with the team through the work that we did together. So I walked away from that role feeling much more confident and excited to take on progressively harder challenges as time. Really look at that one as being a great success. So a couple of the strategies that I'd like to talk through about 3 strategies here. One of these is know yourself so that you can advocate for yourself. Know your strengths, know your gaps, know what you like, what you don't like. I would say this took me a long time to learn. Early in my career, I tended to look to others, like my leaders, to tell me what my next role should be or what I should do, where I would gain the best experience or really what was a good fit for me. And the solutions that I got back didn't always feel like what was right for me. I've had a bit of an awakening recently to realize that I actually like operations facing roles. It's not what everybody likes, but I actually do like being close to our operations, being able to influence the day to day decisions, outcomes, actions that we're doing, the priorities to make our plants run safer and more reliable. Not everybody in this room is going to like to do that. I personally don't enjoy new technology roles, for example. That's one that isn't really high on my list. Or strategy. Sometimes I don't love strategy discussions, right? But that's just me, right? So I think another strength that I've recognized in myself is the ability to take complex or ambiguous information and synthesize it down and then share it simply and clearly for others. So being able to share these facts that I'm learning about myself with the people that are in a position to help me really sets me up to make good choices and to have good opportunities, good doors open for me in the future. Another thing I'll say as a strategy is learn every day. So learning comes from doing, seeing, listening, reading, asking questions. In my first job in Suncor as an environmental coordinator, part of my role included providing the documentations that we would send to the Alberta regulator on incidents that happened. The information would come from engineering and operations people. And as a junior person, I could have just taken this information, put it in the spreadsheet, and sent it on. And really, in a lot of cases, that was what the ask was. But what I realized is it actually provided a great opportunity to learn. So I could dig in, I could challenge the information that was coming from these different sources. Sometimes they contradicted each other. Sometimes there was a nuance underneath what was being shared that required some further exploration. It also just allowed me to learn about the assets. So as we would ask questions or challenge, sometimes I would go see them. Sometimes I would have a further discussion. And in each of these cases, I got to learn, I got to ask questions, I got to start to prove my value a little bit in being able to craft the story. What I'd say is often an ask or an action, particularly early in your career, but I wouldn't limit it to that, might seem trivial. And yet it can provide a fantastic opportunity in retrospect to push beyond a boundary, to learn, to see a system in a bigger way, and to gain insights. So don't underestimate when you're being asked to participate in some of that stuff, what you can gain from it is what I would say. Another opportunity to learn and grow comes through taking smart risks, which I think the earlier example I had is a great one. But any assignment that feels like it's outside your capability is a great way to build and grow. And then the obligation to you is to follow up and invest in being prepared to deliver what you've committed to. So I think that that's the other piece there. I'll just share. So my kids recently watched Marvel's Into the Spider-Verse. So, and there's an exchange where Miles Morales says, "When will I know I'm ready?" And Peter Parker says, "Well, you won't. It's a leap of faith." And I think that that's kind of a nice little cute quote to resonate with the attitude that you may want to apply when considering actions or opportunities that will stretch and develop you. The last one that I have here is be a great leader. And this isn't just people leader. I think anyone in this room who's a technical professional is a leader through your influence. A lot of these themes have come up today, but really strong leadership comes through building relationships. It comes through creating a network, being a mentor or having a mentor, supporting others. And it also comes from recognizing where others are at and helping to pull them up. Many of the opportunities, and I've talked about a few, have come through the support of others, through coaching conversations or through advocacy. And each of us playing in the space provides, is one of the greatest ways that we can make a difference in providing for others. There's been a little bit of conversation around, I think about our last comment there, around what is in your control. And so this is something that I've had a lot of conversation with at work. If you've seen the noise or the announcements on Suncor, there's a bit of noise today at Suncor, right? And I have a great leader right now, a great little Filipino guy leader, and he's wonderful. But one of the things that he's been instilling us is, what is in your control. And he'll use an analogy of a victim and a player. Maybe these aren't terms that you love, but I think that they're good representations. A victim is where things happen to you, and you are at the mercy of the external environment. The concept of a player is somebody that can take what's happening and think about what's in their control, which is really how do you respond. So you can leave a situation, you can act, you cannot act, but all of that, framing yourself as wanting to be a player, whether you like the term or not, and thinking about the action that you want to take when you're confronted with something that's not great is really your best strategy to have there. So I think with that, I really hope this has resonated and that you've got a couple takeaways that you can leverage. I would say often we can be our own worst critic, but we can also be our own best supporter and cheerleader. So a couple suggestions here: know yourself, advocate for yourself, learn every day, and then be a great leader with that concept of, how do you react to change and what do what can you control, are really some things that I hope you can take away from today. Yeah.
Sure. Who else, if they can hear me or not. I just wanted to put in perspective. So, Nicole, your title today is?
Director of Operations Support for refining and logistics assets.
So, refining and logistic assets is what?
So we have across Suncor 4 refineries, so 3 in Canada, 1 in the United States. We have, and then our logistics portfolio includes a pretty broad pipeline network, as well as 13 Canadian terminals, a couple terminals in the United States. We've got pipelines in the United States as well. We have an ethanol plant and a sulfur plant, and then we oversee some marine and rail. And yeah, and so my role in that, I report to our senior vice president of refining and logistics. And with that, my portfolio includes the capital component, so submitting that piece of it, our operational risk portfolio or component, and then a bunch of other stuff. Really a network of different things that kind of happen to all those assets. Yeah.
Yeah. What does a typical day for you look like?
Well, it's very diverse, right? And
Lots of meetings?
Lots of meetings, yeah. Probably too many. I would say there's a great drive with my current leader for us to get out of our meetings and spend more time with our people and get in the field. And so that's been a really nice evolution, is that we spend more time focusing on traveling to the refineries, spending, but that's like a small component of my role. There is still a lot of time in meetings. Yeah, it can be anything. Like today, earlier to this, we had some conversations on benchmarking. We had some conversations on our capital portfolio, which we're getting ready to submit. The risk space, you know, I'm probably a little geeky on liking what we do in the risk space, but thinking about changes that we will make to how we look at risk, kind of right from the top down to our operating level. Yeah, so it's good.
Yeah. So one of the things that inclined that I was very happy when Nicole came forward is that I see this tiny lady and she is so commanding in meetings, and there are people from across Canada, the States, with varying ages, experience, people who have been in their jobs for, I don't know, 30 or something years. And she always seems to have control of what's going on in the meeting. And she always leads the meeting into a resolution, or as something that can be followed through. It doesn't go into, like, what a waste of time. Like, we're talking about this and we're not getting anywhere. So I was very happy when Nicole came forward. So do we have a question from the chat by any chance? No? Okay. Oh, from here. Okay. I'm just going to take this with me, and then I'm going to take it over there.
Hi, thanks so much for the chat. I think it really resonated with me. And my question before we even front run it a little bit with what you were saying, though, was what are your strategies for kind of winning over some of those more senior, really highly technical people that are experts in their field? And I'm thinking of, you were saying when you took that role as the process director, like they were such a high performing team already. And I think sometimes you find individuals that think like, we don't even need our leader, like we're doing this already. So how did you define what that strategy for success would look like for yourself, earn that trust, build up that relationship, and then find a way to, I think, do that, like you said, that carry that thread through the organization in all of your other roles to say, I'm going to somewhat command the room or lead really effective meetings and be able to prove myself in front of, people who might have more years experience, might be more expert at something, but kind of erase that imposter syndrome even in that situation.
Hold it. Guess we're We're working with the technology here.
That's an excellent question, and I have a few thoughts. I would say one thing that I find very important and helps me is do the legwork to be sure that the information you have is credible. And that's something that I don't find everyone does. And in fact, I would say it's hard to do. And more senior in the operation, like a number of my peers are VPs, and their information sort of stops at a level down. And so if their director is saying something, then that's the truth. And I think that it's within my own team. So if I think back to the engineering team, I spent time with every one of them. And so whether it was someone who directly reported to me or next level down or the student or whoever it was, I focused on building relationships, not just personally, but what are you working on? And does it make sense? And do you have issues? And is there things that you're seeing that you're feeling like we aren't addressing properly? That was where a lot of it came from. And sometimes I found that particularly the deeper you go in the organization, people don't feel like they have a voice. And so that was really it, is they would have seen something. They would have an impression of what the organization would do with that information. And so therefore they wouldn't share it. This is a problem, but nobody's going to address it. This is a problem. I brought it up before and nobody did anything. And I think that the credibility comes from aggregating that sometimes with a larger context, which I think it's very important to bring back to the person you've talked to. There is a reason that their concern hasn't been addressed, but they've never got that feedback loop to say, this is it. So what that did going deeper is that when I am engaged with larger meetings, it's a more informed perspective. And I'll be able to say to the people that I'm talking to, well, this information has come from a larger population size. It's informed by the sites, but trying to do that in a non-blameful way, and in a way that can allow us to drive forward, if that makes sense. And it comes through like years of working at it. One thing I'll say is the diversity of my experience has really helped me, because sometimes I have come across something before and I'm able to say, oh, this other part of the organization has a great solution, and we should be able to leverage that. One of the roles that I sort of glossed over, I did a role as our technical competency manager, which feels like a weird role to have in a big company, and it did when I took it. But we managed the mentorship program, we managed our EIT rotations, and we focused on a more structured program to build technical competency in our engineers. And not all of that has stuck, but the components that have, a lot of people don't even know they exist. And so when it's a question around like, what do you do for mentorship? And you can just direct them in the way that they need to, or a PEGA really well. It's all bits that you can bring and share in a credible and helpful way, not in a, I don't know, punitive or, yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah. There you go.
Hi, can you hear me?
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay. What's some advice you would give for like starting a new job, or like what's the strategy you've used in the past for like starting a new role and kind of staying for, I guess, at least 3 years? I just went through a new grad program, so it's kind of like 1 year at a time, and now I'm like in a permanent position. So yeah, what's some advice you'd have for that?
So I think building relationships is the most important thing, right, to do right off the bat, and do it with an openness, right? Like, go to people, tell them, you're new, share your experience, share a little bit about yourself, work on the relationship part, but then ask, if you're filling a role that was previously done, learn from people, what they thought the previous person did well, what they thought the role could deliver more. So getting a little bit of that context, I think, is very important. If the role is new, I think it's the same lens, but it's just where do you think that this role adds value? And I find in my experience, you start that reach out and maybe you go and suddenly you've gone too far and all of a sudden, you've got a lot of work you've got to do, but that's okay, right? I think then it helps you to step back from that and possibly have a conversation again, maybe with your leader on what are the priorities, right? But the other thing is you always have more time early in your role to learn, right? And that's the time when I don't know if your role involves planned, that's when you might be able to look at the P&IDs or you might be able to look at a plot plan. If your role involves strategy or something, you can look at the history, what's been done in the past. But I think that those would be my 2 tips early on is focus on learning in a way that you won't probably get an opportunity to do in the future and work on building networks.
All the Synovus people are asking the question.
That's okay.
You said you had 3 kids, and maybe this is too personal of a question.
No,
but I'm
nothing's
just-
too personal. Nothing's too personal. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay, can you just explain how you managed to have 3 children and somehow still do basically a site, because I worked at site for 4 years,
Yeah.
still have a site-based role. Granted, maybe you weren't going every Monday to Thursday, but
Yeah.
it's still a lot every 2 weeks. I'm not like, it's a lot of travel.
Sure. Yeah.
Have a family and a marriage and do all of the other, I just don't fully understand.
Not much of a social life.
I'm so
That's-
you're like a superhuman. I don't understand. And also, I really hope you come work for Synovus.
So I guess the personal, so my husband works for CNRL, so we're all the companies in the room now, but he's fly in, fly out, which sounds like it adds more complexity, but it actually compartmentalizes our life in some way. And so my ease of travel is the weeks that he's home. So his role is pretty shut off when he's not at site. And so the 7 days of the every 2 weeks that he's home was when I could travel to site. And so there is a compromise. There is a compromise there that, our time together is impacted by a bit of like ships passing in the night kind of thing. But I would plan my trip at that point. I don't have family in Calgary, but I have an awesome mom. She's actually at my house right now because I'm going to Montreal next week. And so as much as I can call in the mom favor, I will. As we get up to like 4 times a year, 5 times a year, she's not liking it quite so much. but it, and I think that's what I would also say is now my kids are getting older. My oldest is 15. And so the challenges around after school care are much easier in my life today. So my kids were in a neighborhood where they can get home on their own, and I have a 15-year-old in the house, and that wouldn't have been as easy early on. And so if you're parents, it is like a juggling match that you revisit every year, and you sort of say, like, what's our strategy for this year? And if it's after school care, or if it's friends and calling in some favors, you don't want to do that too much either. I would say that's not a great lever to depend on. So COVID happened when my little guy was in kindergarten. And in some ways that worked out super awesome because I didn't travel nearly as much at a time when it would have been challenging for us, right? So I don't have a great answer. I think it's like probably all of you are doing, which is you navigate it as you go. Yeah.